The first thing I felt was the water. Not the clean water of a shower or the gentle water of a bath, the murky, soap-scummed water of a footbath, filling my nose and mouth and lungs, drowning me from the inside out. I felt my cousin's hands on the back of my head, pressing down with a strength I'd never known she had. I felt the ceramic edge of the basin digging into my throat. I felt my body thrashing, my arms flailing, my nails scraping uselessly against the sides of the tub. I felt myself dying. And then, suddenly, I was above it all. I floated near the ceiling, looking down at the scene below. My body was limp in the footbath, water sloshing over the edges onto the tile floor. My cousin Chloe stood over me, her hand still extended, her face twisted with a mixture of effort and satisfaction. She had just killed me. She straightened up, smoothed down her blouse, and walked calmly to the door. She called out, to my parents, maybe, or to the neighbors, with a voice full of practiced grief, "Oh my God! Ava fell in the tub." I tried to save her, but she was already gone. I watched her performance from my place near the ceiling. The tears that sprang to her eyes were not real, but they looked real enough. The trembling hands were a lie, but they were convincing lies. She'd done this before. She'd planned this before. And now she was getting away with it. I floated there for a long time, watching the aftermath of my own murder. My parents came running, their faces white with shock and grief. My mother fell to her knees beside my body, her sobs raw and terrible. My father tried to pull her away, his voice breaking as he called for an ambulance that was already too late. Chloe stood in the corner, her hand over her mouth, playing the part of the grieving cousin. Every now and then, she would glance at my parents to gauge their reactions, to make sure her performance was landing. I wanted to scream. I wanted to shake them awake, to make them see the truth. But I had no body anymore. No voice. No way to reach them. All I could do was watch. The paramedics came. They pronounced me dead at the scene. My mother collapsed. My father held her up, his face a mask of grief that would haunt me for the rest of my afterlife. And Chloe cried her crocodile tears and hugged my mother and whispered words of comfort that were really words of triumph. I had been so stupid. In my first life, the life that had just ended, I had been a good person. I had been the kind of person who ran toward danger, not away from it. When I'd heard Chloe's screams 3 years earlier, I hadn't hesitated. I'd grabbed the first weapon I could find and charged into her bedroom to save her from the intruder who had broken in. I'd fought him. I'd bled for her. I'd been cut down, my skull fractured, my brain damaged, my future stolen, all because I tried to save someone who didn't deserve it. And Chloe had watched me bleed. She'd watched me fall. And then, when the police arrived, she'd opened the door for the intruder and let him escape. She'd said she didn't see his face. She'd let the case go cold. She'd let the man who had attacked her walk free, because he was handsome and she'd decided she wanted him instead. And when I was broken, mindless, dependent on my parents for everything, she'd finished the job. She'd drowned me. The dream began to fade. The ceiling, the room, the grief-stricken faces of my parents, all of it began to dissolve like smoke in the wind. I felt myself falling. And then, I opened my eyes. The first thing I noticed was the darkness. Not the darkness of death, I knew that darkness well enough by now. The darkness of a bedroom at night, lit only by the pale glow of a streetlight filtering through the curtains. The familiar shape of my dresser, my closet, my desk. The familiar weight of my blanket. I was in my bed. I was in my old apartment, the one I'd rented during my first year of graduate school. The one where Chloe had been staying with me when the intruder had broken in. The one where she'd let me die. I sat up slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. My hands went to my head. They found smooth skin, a full skull, no concave indentation where the blade had cut into my brain. My mind was clear, sharp, unclouded by the fog of traumatic brain injury. I was whole again. I was young again. I was back. The scream came from the next room. "Ava! Help me! Someone's in my room." Chloe's voice. Familiar, desperate, the same scream I'd heard on the night of the attack. The same scream that had pulled me out of bed and into a nightmare 3 years ago. I looked at the clock on my nightstand. 1:47 a.m. The same time as before. The same night, the same intruder, the same choice. I heard the sounds of a struggle. A man's voice, low and threatening. A thump, a crash, Chloe's terrified sobbing. She was calling for me. She was begging me to save her. Just like before. I sat there for a moment, letting it all wash over me. The fear, the anger, the memory of what she'd done to me. The way she'd watched me bleed. The way she'd opened the door for the man who'd attacked her. The way she'd drowned me in a footbath, smiling as I struggled. I got out of bed. I walked to my door. I opened it. I looked down the hallway toward Chloe's room. And I didn't go. Instead, I walked to the kitchen. I found a pair of noise-cancelling headphones I'd left on the counter. I put them on and scrolled through my phone until I found a playlist of upbeat, celebratory music. I hit play. The first song was Good Day by the kind of artist who made you forget everything terrible in the world. I turned the volume up as high as it would go and leaned against the counter, listening to the muffled sounds of Chloe's struggle on the other side of the wall. She was on her own this time. She had wanted to be alone with the handsome intruder, hadn't she? She had wanted to make her own choices. I was just giving her what she wanted. The struggle went on for about 10 minutes. I heard it in snatches, between the upbeat melodies of my playlist. The crash of furniture. Chloe's crying. The man's threats. Then, silence. I took off one earbud and listened. The silence stretched on for a long moment. Then I heard the creak of a door opening and closing. Footsteps in the hallway. A whispered conversation. I moved to my own door and pressed my ear against the wood. "There's no one here," Chloe was saying. "She must have gone out or something." The man's voice was low and doubtful. "You said she was in the next room." "She must have left while we were," she paused. "Look, I'll go check her room. You stay here." I stepped back from the door as the handle began to turn. I was ready for her. "Ava." Chloe's voice was sharp, impatient, the tears and fear gone from her tone entirely. "Ava, are you in there?" I said nothing. "Ava, the intruder is gone. I need you to come out and take me to the hospital. I don't know if I'm hurt." I stayed silent. "Ava, don't be a coward. If you don't open this door, I'll never forgive you." I smiled in the darkness. She was right about one thing. I wasn't going to open the door. But not because I was a coward. Because I knew exactly what was waiting for me on the other side. And I wasn't going to walk into that trap again. I moved to the window and looked out at the street below. A single figure was walking away from the building, moving quickly, trying to disappear into the shadows. The intruder. Leaving Chloe alone. I reached for my phone and dialed 911. "Police, fire, or ambulance?" a woman's voice asked. "Police," I said. "There's been an intruder in my apartment. I think he's still in the building." I gave them the address and hung up. Chloe was still pounding on my door. "Ava, I know you're in there. Open this door right now." I sat down on the edge of my bed and waited. The police would arrive in about 10 minutes. Just enough time for Chloe to open the light, see the man's face, and make the mistake that would change her life. She thought she was going to get what she wanted. She had no idea she was walking into a trap. The light flicked on in Chloe's room a few minutes later. I heard her gasp. I heard a man's voice, low and startled. I heard Chloe laugh. The game had begun. I sat on the edge of my bed, listening. The sounds from Chloe's room had changed. Gone were the screams of terror, the desperate pleas for help. In their place was something I hadn't expected. Laughter. Low, breathy, the kind of laugh you make when you're trying to be seductive. I pressed my ear against the wall. "You're not a police officer," Chloe was saying. "You're a burglar. I can tell." The man's voice was low and rough. "What's your point?" "My point is, you broke into the wrong apartment." Another laugh. "But you're lucky. I like you. I might even let you go." "What?" "On one condition." She paused. "You have to come back tomorrow." I heard the man laugh. You're insane. Maybe. But I'm also the only thing standing between you and a prison cell. If I call the police right now, you're going away for a long time. But if you play along, I can make sure no one ever finds out. There was a long silence. I imagined Marcus weighing his options. He was a criminal, but he wasn't stupid. He had to know that Chloe was dangerous in her own way. Fine, he said finally. Tomorrow. You're not going anywhere. I heard a door close. I'm not done with you yet. I pulled back from the wall and smiled. Chloe had just made the biggest mistake of her life. She'd fallen in love with her attacker. She'd opened the door for him, invited him in, and now she was going to let him stay. I couldn't have planned it better myself. The police arrived 10 minutes later. I heard the sirens from my room, the sound of heavy footsteps in the hallway, the pounding on the front door. I waited until I heard Chloe's startled cry before I opened my door and walked out. Chloe was standing in the living room, her hair disheveled, her clothes rumpled, trying to hide the fact that she'd just been entertaining a man she'd met 30 minutes ago. Marcus was nowhere to be seen. Ava. She was furious, her face flushed with anger and embarrassment. What are you doing? I told you it was a misunderstanding. Hello, one of the officers interrupted, turning to me. Are you the one who called? Yes, officer. I kept my voice calm and measured. I heard screams coming from my cousin's room. I was worried she was being attacked. Attacked? The officer's eyebrows rose. Miss, is this true? Chloe opened her mouth to deny it, but before she could speak, I cut in. She wasn't attacked, I said carefully. But she was with someone. A man. He was in her room tonight. The officer turned to Chloe. Is this true? Chloe's face reddened. He was a friend. A friend I invited over. At 1 a.m. We were watching a movie. He left early. The officer wasn't convinced. He looked around the apartment, his sharp eyes taking in the overturned chair, the scattered belongings, the signs of a struggle. He wasn't going to let this go easily. He said to me, I'd like to ask you a few questions. Of course. The interrogation took place in the living room. The other officers had cleared out to search the building, leaving just me, Chloe, and the lead detective, a woman with tired eyes and a no-nonsense attitude. Her name was Detective Evans, and she didn't look like she believed a word anyone was saying. Your cousin is in love with him, I said. That's all this is. They're both adults. They can do whatever they want. That's not what the 911 call implied. I didn't see what happened. I only heard what my cousin told me. Detective Evans studied me for a long moment. I could see her thinking, weighing my words against everything she'd seen. She didn't trust me, but she didn't have enough to push back. All right, she said finally. I'll let it go this time. But if I find out anything different. Of course, Detective. Chloe cornered me as soon as the police left. What were you thinking? Her voice was shrill, her face inches from mine. You almost ruined everything. I didn't know he was your boyfriend, I said, playing the part of the confused cousin. I just heard screams. I thought you were in danger. We were in danger. But then I fixed it. And now you've gone and made it worse. Worse. Now he's scared. Now he might not come back. She shook her head, disgust written across her face. You really are useless, aren't you? I didn't answer. I just stood there, letting her rage wash over me. She had no idea what was coming. The next morning, Marcus knocked on our door. Chloe opened it before I could even reach the living room. She'd been waiting for him, already dressed and made up, her hair curled and her lips painted a bright, aggressive red. You came, she breathed. I'm here, he said. What do you want? Everything. I stayed in my room and listened to them talk. Chloe was charming, in her own way, the kind of charming that came from desperation, from wanting something so badly you'd do anything to get it. Marcus was wary, but he wasn't immune. He'd come back, hadn't he? By the end of the afternoon, they'd made a deal. Chloe would accidentally lose his ID. She would have him over whenever she wanted. He would be her boyfriend. He would do everything she asked. And in return, she would make sure no one else came looking for him. I smiled in the darkness of my room. It was exactly what I'd hoped for. The wedding happened 2 weeks later. It was a small, private ceremony at the county clerk's office. Chloe wore a white dress she'd bought at a thrift store and a veil she'd made out of a curtain. Marcus wore a suit that was too tight and looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. I was the witness. The couple in front of me is entitled to 3 to 4 years in prison, I'd joked to Chloe earlier. At least you know where you'll spend your anniversary. She hadn't laughed. I'd laughed enough for both of us. The ceremony was quick and impersonal. Marcus said the words like they were being pulled from him one by one. Chloe said them like she meant every single one. When it was over, Chloe threw her arms around her new husband and kissed him in front of the clerk. "This is the happiest day of my life," she said. Marcus didn't answer. He just stood there, his face pale and still. I clapped politely. "Congratulations," I said. "I hope you'll be very happy together." The marriage was a disaster from the start. I knew it would be. I'd counted on it. But even I couldn't have predicted just how quickly it would fall apart. Chloe and Marcus moved into my apartment the day after the wedding. They didn't ask. They didn't offer to pay rent. They just showed up with 2 suitcases and a shared sense of entitlement that was almost impressive. "This is perfect," Chloe said, dropping her bags in the middle of my living room. "We'll take the master bedroom. You can stay in the smaller room. Marcus and I need our privacy. You understand?" I understood perfectly. They were taking over my home, my space, my life. And they weren't going to stop there. The first week was the worst. Chloe and Marcus settled in like they owned the place. They ate my food, used my toiletries, left their dirty dishes in the sink. They stayed up late watching TV at full volume and slept in until noon. They had loud, dramatic fights in the middle of the night and even louder reconciliations. I tried to talk to Chloe about it. "Chloe, you need to pay your share of the rent." "Rent?" She laughed. "We're family. Family doesn't charge each other rent." "Chloe," we agreed. "I don't remember any agreement." She waved a hand dismissively. "Besides, Marcus and I are going through a rough patch. We need time to figure things out. You wouldn't want to make things worse for us, would you?" I looked at her for a long moment. I saw the girl who'd tried to drown me. The woman who'd opened the door for her attacker. The creature who'd traded her integrity for a handsome face and a criminal record. "No," I said. "I wouldn't want to make things worse for you." I smiled. She didn't see what was coming. The second week, they started redecorating. Chloe bought new curtains and pillows, charged them to a credit card that I was fairly sure had my name on it. She rearranged the furniture, moved my books to make room for her knickknacks, hung pictures of herself and Marcus on every wall. Marcus was less enthusiastic about the renovations, but he didn't stop her. He spent most of his time lying on the couch, playing video games, and avoiding eye contact. I watched it all from my room. I was waiting. Patiently. The third week, they changed the locks. I came home from work to find my key no longer worked. The deadbolt had been replaced, the handle swapped out for something shiny and new. There was a note taped to my door in Chloe's handwriting. "We decided you needed your own space. Good luck." I stood there for a long moment, staring at the note. Then I took out my phone and called Chloe. She picked up on the first ring. "Oh, Ava. I'm so glad you called. Listen, Marcus and I are having a bit of a romantic evening. Can you call back later? Or, never. Haha. Chloe." "Ooh, he's calling me. Gotta go. Bye." She hung up. I stared at my phone. She'd gone too far. She knew it. She just didn't care. I called her back. She picked up again, her voice impatient. "What? We're in the middle of something. I need my stuff. My clothes, my books, my computer. I need to get into my apartment." "It's not your apartment anymore. It's my apartment. I live here now. You're not on the lease. So, you're not here. You can't stop me. I heard her whisper something to Marcus. A moment later, I heard the unmistakable sound of a video call connecting. I looked at the screen. Chloe was lying in my bed, her phone propped up on the pillow, her face flushed with a mixture of triumph and arousal. Marcus was there too, half-dressed, his expression caught between discomfort and arousal. Look what I found, Chloe said, holding up a small bottle. You forgot this in your nightstand. Chloe, that's not. Ooh, is this what I think it is? She laughed, a high, tinkling sound. I didn't know you were into this kind of thing. Maybe you're not as boring as I thought. Chloe, stop. Fine, fine. But I'm keeping it anyway. She winked and ended the call. The next day, I got a call from the hospital. Miss Ava. We have a patient here who listed you as an emergency contact. A Chloe Miller. I almost laughed. Miller. She'd taken his name. What happened? It's a bit complicated. There's been an incident. Would you be able to come down here? I didn't go to the hospital right away. I went home first. My apartment was a mess. The lock had been replaced, but I still had my key. I'd kept it as a souvenir, a reminder of the fight that would come. I let myself in. I gathered my things, my clothes, my books, my computer. I threw them into bags and boxes and carried them out one by one. Chloe's stuff stayed exactly where it was. I left the apartment, locked the door, and went to the hospital. The scene I walked into was, well, it was something. Chloe and Marcus were in a private room, 2 beds pushed together, both of them covered in blankets and looking like they'd been through a war. Chloe was crying. Marcus looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. What happened? I asked. Chloe pointed a trembling finger at me. She's the one who did this to us. I'm sorry. The lubricant. It was yours. You did this on purpose. I blinked. What lubricant? The one I found in your nightstand. The one you left for me to find. I remembered the bottle. It had been a small container, unlabeled, filled with a clear liquid that I'd used for a completely different purpose. That wasn't lubricant, I said. Chloe stopped crying. What? It was glue. The silence that followed was absolutely beautiful. Chloe's face went through a series of emotions, from confusion to dawning horror to pure, unfiltered rage. You did this to us. I didn't do anything. You took my things without asking. You used them without checking what they were. That's not my fault. You can't do this to me. I didn't do anything. I smiled, sweet and poisonous. You did it to yourself. The hospital staff separated them with a series of awkward, painful procedures. I watched from the hallway as they worked. Chloe cried the whole time. Marcus didn't say a word. It took several hours, but eventually they were freed from each other, and from the mess they'd made. I stayed until the end. I wanted to see their faces. When Marcus finally left the hospital, he didn't look back. He just walked out the door and disappeared into the night. Chloe chased after him, but he was already gone. She stood on the sidewalk in her hospital gown, screaming his name into the darkness. He didn't come back. I watched from the hospital lobby window. And I smiled. Marcus didn't come back for 3 weeks. Chloe called him constantly, left voicemails, sent texts. She cried, she begged, she threatened. She told him she loved him, she told him she'd kill herself, she told him she'd make his life a living hell if he didn't come home. He ignored all of it. Until the money ran out. That was the thing about Marcus. He was a coward and a criminal, but he wasn't stupid. He knew a good thing when he saw it. And Chloe, for all her flaws, was a good thing, an endless supply of credit cards, a family with money, a woman desperate enough to do anything to keep him. He came back on a Thursday. Chloe was already waiting at the door when he walked in. She'd been watching the street all day, hoping. Her eyes were red, her face pale, but she was wearing her best dress and her most desperate smile. I knew you'd come back, she said. I knew you loved me. Marcus didn't say anything. He just walked past her into the apartment, his eyes already scanning the room for anything worth taking. I need money, he said. I know, honey. I've been saving. She had been saving, by stealing from her parents. Chloe's parents were good people. They'd raised her with love, given her everything she'd ever wanted, made excuses for her when she'd made mistakes. They didn't deserve what she was about to do to them. But that didn't stop her. I need access to their accounts, Marcus said. Not just their credit cards. I need real money. Enough to get us out of here. How much? Enough to start over. Somewhere far away from here. Chloe didn't question it. She didn't ask where they were going or what they'd do when they got there. She just nodded. I'll get it for you, she said. Good girl. He kissed her forehead, and she melted. The first step was the phone. Chloe had grown up with her parents' fingerprints on every device. She knew their passwords, their security questions, the tricks they used to keep their information safe. Getting access to their phones was easy. The hard part was the credit check, the loans, the transfer of funds. Use the online lenders, Marcus told her. The ones that don't ask too many questions. And make sure you use their accounts, not yours. That way, if something goes wrong, it's their problem, not ours. Chloe nodded, her fingers flying across the screen. She was good at this. Better than she'd ever been at anything else. It was almost a talent. The money came through in less than 24 hours. $120,000. More than Chloe had ever seen in her life. She stared at the screen, her mouth open, her mind already spinning with possibilities. This is it, she said. We're going to be rich. We're going to be free. Marcus took the phone from her hands and transferred the money to his own account. Chloe didn't see it. She was too busy dreaming of the life they'd have together, the house, the cars, the children, the happily ever after that was finally within reach. She didn't see him pack his bag. She didn't see him smile as he zipped it closed. She didn't see him leave until it was too late. What do you mean he's gone? Chloe's voice was shrill, frantic, the voice of a woman who'd just realized she'd been played for a fool. She was standing in the middle of our living room, my living room, the one she'd stolen, her phone pressed to her ear, her face white with shock. He took the money, she said. All of it. And now he's gone. I didn't say anything. He said he loved me, she continued. He said we were going to be together forever. He lied. She looked at me, her eyes wide with horror. I need to get it back. I need to find him. You can't. He took everything from me. I nodded slowly. He did. And now you're going to pay for it. The phone call came a few hours later. It was Uncle Paul, his voice strained with a mixture of anger and humiliation. He'd gotten a notification from the bank, an alert about an unauthorized loan in his name. He'd checked his credit and found that someone had borrowed over $100,000 under his identity. He knew it had to be Chloe. Where is she? He demanded. I need to talk to her right now. She's here, I said. I'll bring her to you. Chloe fought me the whole way to her parents' house. You can't do this to me, she sobbed. You're ruining my life. I'm not ruining anything. You ruined it yourself. Marcus is the one who took the money, not me. Marcus wouldn't have been able to take anything if you hadn't given it to him. You stole from your parents, Chloe. You stole from the only people who ever loved you. She had no answer for that. Uncle Paul was waiting for us on the porch. He didn't look like the jovial man I remembered. His face was pale, his eyes sunken, his shoulders slumped with a weight that seemed too heavy for any man to carry. Aunt Linda stood behind him, her hand over her mouth, her eyes already wet. Chloe, Uncle Paul said. Tell me it's not true. Chloe didn't answer. Tell me you didn't do this to us. She couldn't look at him. Chloe, please. I didn't mean to hurt you, she whispered. I just wanted to be happy. Happy? Uncle Paul's voice cracked. You stole from us. You lied to us. You destroyed our savings, our retirement, everything we worked for. And you did it for a man who didn't even love you. He loved me. He didn't love you. He used you. And you let him. Chloe's face crumpled. For the first time, I saw real regret in her eyes. But it was too late. The police came an hour later. They took Chloe's statement, arrested her on charges of fraud and identity theft. She didn't fight them. She didn't try to run. She just sat there, staring at the floor, her face blank with shock. Marcus was found a few days later. He'd tried to leave the country with the money, but the authorities had been tipped off by an anonymous call, a call I'd made. They caught him at the airport, a suitcase full of cash, a one-way ticket to a country with no extradition treaty. He'd confessed to everything. The loan fraud, the identity theft, the assault on Chloe. He was looking at a long time in prison. Chloe was looking at time too. When I visited her in the holding cell, she looked up at me with eyes that had lost all their fire. She was broken now, empty, a shell of the woman who'd drowned me in a footbath and laughed as I died. You did this to me, she said. You planned all of this. I just gave you what you wanted. I didn't wait for her to respond. I turned and walked away, leaving her alone with the sound of the cell door closing behind me. The trial was over quickly. Chloe pleaded guilty, hoping for a lighter sentence. She got 3 years, less than she deserved, but enough to teach her a lesson. Her parents visited her once, but they never came back. They'd decided to cut their losses, to move forward without the daughter who'd betrayed them. Marcus got 10 years. The judge called him a predator who had preyed on a vulnerable woman. I didn't disagree. But I knew the truth. Chloe had been the predator too, in her own way. She just hadn't been smart enough to see it. As for me, I went back to school. I walked through the gates of my university with a lighter step, the shadow of the past finally lifting from my shoulders. I had a future now, a future I'd built with my own hands, without anyone's help. I was free. The day Chloe was released from prison, I was standing on the campus of my new university. It wasn't the same school I'd been accepted to before, that offer had expired years ago. But I'd reapplied. I'd studied, I'd worked, I'd earned my place. It wasn't the Ivy League dream I'd once had, but it was mine. And that was enough. The sun was warm on my face. The leaves of the old trees lining the quad were just beginning to turn gold. Students walked past me in clusters, laughing, talking, living their lives with the casual ease of people who had never known what it was like to have everything taken away. I was one of them now. I was one of the living. I thought about Chloe sometimes. Not with anger anymore, that had faded over the years. With something closer to pity. She had wanted everything and understood nothing. She had been willing to destroy anyone who got in her way, including herself. And in the end, she had succeeded. She had destroyed herself. I didn't hear about Chloe's release until a few weeks later. My aunt called me, Aunt Linda, Chloe's mother. She sounded tired, worn down by years of disappointment and grief. She's out, Aunt Linda said. She's staying with us for a while. She says she wants to make things right. I didn't say anything. I know she hurt you, Ava. I know she did terrible things. But she's still my daughter. I have to try. I understand, I said. Aunt Linda was silent for a long moment. Do you think you could ever forgive her? I thought about it. I thought about the footbath, the water, the feeling of drowning. I thought about the years I'd lost, the life that had been stolen from me. I thought about the woman who had done it all, and the reasons she'd given for it. I don't know, I said. I don't think I've forgiven her. But I don't hate her anymore either. That's something, I suppose. Yes, I said. I suppose it is. I saw Chloe one more time. It was at a family gathering, the kind of event I usually avoided. She was sitting in the corner, away from everyone else, her hands folded in her lap. She looked older, thinner, more worn down. The spark that had once made her so dangerous was gone. She saw me watching her and flinched. I walked over and sat down across from her. Ava, she said. I didn't think you'd come. I didn't think I would either. She looked at me for a long moment. I'm sorry, she said. I know it doesn't mean anything. But I'm sorry. I didn't say anything. I was so angry at you. I was so jealous. You had everything I wanted, the intelligence, the opportunities, the future. And I hated you for it. I know. I didn't realize. I didn't understand that I was the one destroying myself. That's the thing about jealousy, I said. It doesn't just hurt the person you're jealous of. It hurts you too. She nodded slowly. I stood up. Take care of yourself, Chloe. She looked up at me, her eyes bright with unshed tears. Do you think I could ever be better? I thought about it. I thought about all the chances she'd been given and all the ways she'd wasted them. I thought about the choices she'd made and the person she'd become. Maybe, I said. If you want it enough. I left her there, sitting alone in the corner of the room, and I didn't look back. I saw Marcus one more time too. It was years later, on the news. He'd been released from prison and had immediately tried to find Chloe again. He'd tracked her down, asked for money, threatened her when she refused. Chloe had fought back this time. She'd called the police. She'd pressed charges. She'd finally learned that love didn't mean letting someone destroy you. Marcus was back in prison now. The judge had given him an additional 5 years for harassment and assault. I watched the report on the news and felt nothing. He was just another man who had chosen cruelty over kindness. He was just another cautionary tale. I turned off the TV and went back to my life. The years passed. I graduated from university. I found a job I loved. I built a life that was my own, a life that had nothing to do with Chloe or Marcus or the past that had tried so hard to destroy me. I met someone. A good man, kind and patient, who didn't ask too many questions about the scars I carried. He saw me as I was and loved me anyway. We got married in a small ceremony, surrounded by the people who mattered most. My parents were there, their faces bright with joy. Aunt Linda was there too, hesitant but hopeful. Chloe wasn't there. She'd been invited, but she'd declined. She said she was still working on herself, still trying to become someone worthy of being around. I didn't push. Some things take time. Some things take a lifetime. And some things are never meant to be fixed. I thought about my grandmother sometimes. She was the one who'd raised me, the one who'd taught me right from wrong. She'd died long before all of this happened, but I could still hear her voice in my head. Don't let anyone take away your light, Ava, she'd said. The world can be a dark place. But you're allowed to be happy. I was happy now. Finally, truly happy. I had a home. I had a family. I had a future that was my own. And I had the knowledge that I had survived. Not just the drowning, not just the betrayal, not just the years of pain and loss. I had survived all of it and emerged stronger on the other side. I had one. Extra one, the day she came back. The first time I saw Chloe after she got out of prison, I almost didn't recognize her. She was standing at the edge of the park, a few blocks from my apartment. I was walking home from work, my mind on dinner and grading papers and the 1,000 small tasks that filled my days. When I looked up and saw her, I stopped. She wasn't wearing makeup. She never used to go anywhere without makeup. Her hair was shorter, pulled back in a simple ponytail. She was wearing jeans and a plain sweater, nothing like the flashy clothes she'd once favored. She looked tired. But she also looked peaceful. In a way she'd never looked before. Hi, she said. Hi. I wasn't sure you'd stop. I wasn't sure I would either. She laughed. It was a small laugh, uncertain, nothing like the loud, confident laugh I remembered. I've been practicing what to say to you for months. Now that you're here, I can't remember any of it. Just say it. She took a breath. I'm sorry. I know I've said it before. I know it doesn't mean anything. But I'm sorry for everything I did to you. For the drowning. For the years before that. For all of it. I waited. She kept going. I was so angry at you. I was so jealous. You had everything I wanted, the brains, the future, the respect of everyone around you. And I hated you for it. I hated you so much that I convinced myself you deserved everything that happened to you. You didn't convince me. I know. She shook her head. I know I didn't. I knew it then too. That's what makes it worse. She looked down at her hands. They were shaking. I'm not asking for your forgiveness. I don't deserve it. I don't even think I want it. She looked up. I just wanted you to know that I understand now. I understand what I did. And I understand that I can never undo it. We stood there for a long moment. The park was quiet, the evening light soft and golden. I thought about the footbath, the water, the feeling of drowning. I thought about the years I'd lost, the life that had been stolen from me. I thought about the woman standing in front of me, who had once been so full of hate that she'd destroyed everything she touched. I don't hate you anymore, I said. She blinked. You don't? No. I used to. But I've spent too long being angry. And I don't want to carry that anymore. But you can't undo what you did. But you can do better. You can be better. That's all anyone can ask. She started to cry. She tried to hide it, but the tears came anyway. I'm going to try, she said. I'm going to try so hard. I know you will. She wiped her eyes. Can I hug you? I hesitated. Then I stepped forward and wrapped my arms around her. She was thin, fragile in a way I'd never noticed before. She held on to me like I was the only thing keeping her from falling. Thank you, she whispered. Don't thank me. Just do better. She nodded against my shoulder. I pulled away and looked at her. Take care of yourself, Chloe. I will. I turned and walked away. I didn't look back. Extra 2. The day I found my peace. Years later, I was standing on a stage in front of a room full of students. It was the kind of moment I'd never imagined for myself. Not in my first life, when I was drowning in the footbath, and not in my second life, when I was just trying to survive. But here I was, a professor at the same university I'd once been too afraid to dream of. The students were waiting for me to speak. I looked out at their faces, young and hopeful and full of possibility. I want to tell you a story, I said. They leaned forward. I want to tell you about the worst thing that ever happened to me. And I want to tell you about how I survived it. I told them about Chloe. I told them about the attack, the drowning, the years of pain and loss. I told them about the second chance I'd been given and the choices I'd made. I didn't tell them everything. Some things were too dark for a lecture hall. But I told them enough. When I was young, I thought I had to be a good person. I thought that if I just tried hard enough, I could save everyone. I thought that was my purpose. I paused. I was wrong. You can't save people who don't want to be saved. And sometimes, the people who need saving the most are the ones who will hurt you if you try. The room was silent. I'm not telling you this to make you afraid. I'm telling you this to make you brave. Because the most important lesson I learned is that you can't give up on yourself. You can't let anyone take your light away. I thought about Chloe. I thought about the footbath, the water, the feeling of dying. I thought about the years I'd spent trying to rebuild my life. I survived, I said. And now, I'm happy. That's the best revenge there is. The students applauded. I smiled and stepped away from the podium. Later that night, I sat in my office, looking out at the darkening campus. A knock came at the door. A student poked her head in. Professor, I just wanted to say thank you for sharing your story. You're welcome. It really helped me. I've been going through some stuff, and I didn't think anyone would understand. But hearing you, it made me feel less alone. That's the best thing anyone could say to me. She smiled and left. I sat there for a long moment, thinking about everything that had led me here. The pain, the loss, the triumph. The journey from drowning to standing in front of a room full of students, sharing my story. I thought about Chloe again. I didn't know where she was or what she was doing. But I hoped she was okay. I hoped she'd found her own peace. I turned off the light and walked home. The night air was cool on my face, and the stars were out, scattered across the sky like 1,000 small lights. I was happy. I was finally, completely happy. Extra 3, the long road back. The first year in prison was the hardest. Chloe sat in her cell, staring at the grey walls, trying to understand how she'd ended up here. She'd had everything. Parents who loved her, a cousin who'd protected her, a future she could have built. And she'd thrown it all away. For what? For a man who'd never loved her. For a fantasy she'd built in her head. She didn't have answers. She only had regret. The other inmates didn't like her. They could smell her weakness, her desperation. She was the girl who'd stolen from her parents, who'd tried to drown her cousin, who'd thrown away everything for a handsome face and a lie. She was alone. The first time she cried was in the middle of the night. She'd been trying to sleep, trying to forget the faces of the people she'd hurt. But they kept coming back, Ava's face as she struggled in the water, her mother's face as she'd learned about the stolen money, her father's face as he'd turned away in shame. She cried until there was nothing left. And then she made a decision. She was going to change. She didn't know how. She didn't know if it was possible. But she was going to try. The prison had a program, a counseling group for inmates who wanted to turn their lives around. Chloe signed up on the first day. The counselor was a tired woman with kind eyes and a no-nonsense voice. She'd seen it all before, heard every excuse, every justification. "Why are you here?" she asked Chloe. Chloe thought about it. "Because I don't want to be the person I used to be." "Who were you?" "Someone who hurt people. Someone who didn't care who she hurt, as long as she got what she wanted." "And who do you want to be now?" Chloe didn't have an answer. But she started to find one. The classes were hard. Not academically, she'd never been a good student, never applied herself. But emotionally, they were brutal. She had to talk about her childhood, her parents, her jealousy of Ava. She had to admit that she'd always felt inferior, that she'd always believed she was the lesser one, the one who would never be good enough. She had to admit that she'd hated Ava not because Ava had done anything wrong, but because Ava had been everything Chloe wasn't. "It was never about her," the counselor said. "It was always about you." Chloe knew she was right. Over the months, something shifted. She started to understand that forgiveness wasn't something you gave to others, it was something you gave to yourself. She couldn't undo what she'd done. She couldn't bring back the years she'd stolen from Ava. But she could decide who she was going to be going forward. She started writing letters. Not to send. She wasn't ready for that. Letters to herself, to her parents, to Ava. Letters that said all the things she'd never been able to say out loud. She wrote about how sorry she was. She wrote about how much she missed her family. She wrote about how she wished she could go back and be a better person. She didn't know if she'd ever send them. But writing them helped. The day she was released, she didn't know where to go. Her parents had offered to take her in, but she wasn't sure she deserved it. She wasn't sure she deserved anything. But she went back anyway. Because they were her parents, and they loved her, and she'd already wasted too many years pushing them away. "I'm sorry," she said, standing in their kitchen, her bags at her feet. "I'm sorry for everything." Her mother didn't say anything. She just pulled Chloe into her arms and held on. Her father stood in the corner, his arms crossed. But his eyes were wet. The first time she visited Ava in the park, she didn't know what to say. She'd practiced the words 100 times. She'd written them in her letters, rehearsed them in her head. But standing in front of Ava, she forgot everything. She stuttered through an apology. She cried. She asked for nothing. And Ava, impossibly, had said she'd forgiven her. Chloe knew she didn't deserve it. She knew she'd never be able to undo what she'd done. But maybe, just maybe, she could become someone who deserved a second chance. She started looking for a job. She started taking classes. She started building a life that was her own. It was slow, painful work. Some days, she wanted to give up. Some days, she felt like the old Chloe was still there, waiting to take over. But she kept going. Because for the first time in her life, she wanted to be good. Extra 4, the day she learned to forgive. I was grading papers when I got the letter. It was a thick envelope, addressed in handwriting I didn't recognize. The return address was a town I'd never heard of. I opened it carefully, half expecting a bill or a piece of junk mail. Inside was a photograph. It was Chloe. She was standing in front of a small building with a sign that read Community Learning Center. She was wearing a uniform, a simple grey polo shirt and black pants, the kind of thing you'd see on a receptionist or a desk clerk. She was smiling. A real smile, not the desperate, performative one I remembered. I turned the photo over. Ava. I know you probably don't want to hear from me. I know I don't deserve to take up space in your life. But I wanted you to know, I'm okay. I got a job. I'm going to therapy. I'm trying to be better. I don't know if I'll ever be the person I should have been. But I'm working on it. One day at a time. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't even expect you to read this. But if you do, thank you. For giving me a chance. For not giving up on me. Love. Chloe. I read the letter 3 times. Then I set it down and looked out the window. The sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. I thought about everything that had happened, the night of the attack, the years of betrayal, the drowning, the rebirth. I thought about all the pain and anger I'd carried for so long. And I thought about Chloe, standing in front of a community center, smiling like she'd finally found something worth holding on to. I picked up a pen and wrote back. Chloe, I'm glad you're okay. I'm glad you're working on yourself. That's all anyone can do. I don't know if I can say I've forgiven you. Not completely. Some wounds take a long time to heal. But I'm not angry anymore. And I think that's enough. Keep going. Keep trying. You'll get there. Take care of yourself. Ava. I didn't know if she'd ever read it. I didn't know if she'd ever respond. But I felt lighter, having written it. I didn't hear from her again for a long time. Years passed. I graduated, found a job, built a life. I met someone, a good man, patient and kind, who understood the parts of me that were still healing. We got married in a small ceremony. My parents were there. Aunt Linda was there. And there was an empty seat in the back, reserved for someone who never came. I didn't know if she'd gotten my letter. I didn't know if she'd even received it. But I knew I'd done my part. The second letter came on a Tuesday. I was in my office, preparing for a lecture, when the mail arrived. I opened it absently, not expecting anything important. Inside was a picture of a small house. A little cottage with a garden, surrounded by flowers and trees. A woman was standing on the front porch, waving at the camera. It was Chloe. She was older now, grayer. But she was smiling. A real smile, full of the peace she'd never known. I turned the picture over. I made it. I got the house. I'm happy. Thank you for believing in me when I didn't believe in myself. Love. Chloe. I looked at the picture for a long time. Then I smiled. She'd made it. After everything, the prison, the pain, the years of struggling, she'd finally found her way. I didn't know if we'd ever see each other again. I didn't know if we'd ever be close. But that didn't matter. What mattered was that she'd found her peace. And I'd found mine.